morning, Sister Paul James.
Well, good morning,
Yes,
Sister
you had
Jody.
a long walk to come to this studio, didn't you?
Well, actually, I've walked here earlier.
Oh.
Made a visit with, in the chapel.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
And some mornings you're here to help feed one of our sisters, correct?
Yes. And so I've done that this morning because I do it every other week.
And the sister's name is?
Kay Muzzy.
And how is Kay doing?
She's doing fine.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Certainly an inspiration in how she's handling this.
Yes. She must be very grateful for your presence.
Well, she is. She's a lovely person. And she's a friend of one of my nieces. They were in school together for 8 grades.
Oh, my.
And my niece entered the Franciscans who taught them. And then Kay moved away from there. And then, I don't know if she was then introduced to our sisters, but she finally entered.
Well, then you must be from the Upper Peninsula.
I am.
You were born there?
I was born there in Newberry, and I often identify myself as the other sister from Newberry because I was that for a long time. But actually, we have a third person, Sister Cora Campbell, and of course the first one was Sister Nadine Foley.
And she preceded you to the congregation, is that correct?
First of all to Siena, and then to the congregation, but before me.
So they had a Dominican school in Newberry?
No, we had catechetical center for several summers, and then the sisters stayed during the year, 3 of them, for catechism. And then finally they did build a school when they built the new church. But our sisters weren't there too long because it wasn't long after that then people left education if they didn't want to stay. Yeah. But I did have some nieces and nephews, I think, who went to the Catholic school.
Well, you must have had a powerful mathematic foundation from your studies in the public school system.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
When I look back, I think that the whole experience was very, very good. And so when I hear about public schools not being
up to par,
now it hurts me. It just does. Because at that time, the teachers not only were good in the classroom, but they were willing to do things outside of the classroom without having to get paid extra. Yeah.
Well, so Newberry to Siena, that's a long, long travel.
It is.
So how did you happen? I've heard Sister Nadine's story, but how did you happen to come to Siena? Because of her?
No, I was getting near graduation, and I've discovered since that time that my mother made a contact with somebody who had sponsored Nadine in terms of tuition at Siena, and asked Mrs. Foley whether she thought that person, Miss Molly Mahoney she was, would do the same for me. And my mother never told me that, but Sister Nadine told me recently. So anyway, to make a long story short, she said yes. And my mother said to me one day, if you'd go to Siena, Miss Mahoney would take care of your tuition, and I'd like you to go and stay a year, and if you don't like it, then you don't have to go back. Well, I did come and I stayed, but the first semester I was so lonesome. It's funny, I did come back. Cried if I got a letter, cried if I didn't get one, cried if I got a phone call, cried if I didn't get one. But once I went home for Christmas, I was fine. I think I miss the family is the whole thing of it, yeah.
Well, God bless Mrs. Molly Mahoney.
Yes.
She has a high place in heaven.
I hope so.
Did she ever realize what she...
I'm not sure because she left Newberry. Yeah.
What was the tuition at Siena at the time?
I think it was $500 for tuition, room, and board.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I did have a work study that first year. I did the dishes.
In Benincasa?
In Benincasa.
Oh my.
And I liked that because you could go from your meal to the where we did the dishes, get them done, and then you were finished. You didn't have to worry.
About another day.
Right,
Another
day.
hour. Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, when I got there, I had traveled all night, because that's how we got down, on a bus, and gone to the dining room from the bus, and Sister Petronilla came in, and she said, "Is Lois Villemure here?" And so I went out, and she proceeded to kind of scold me because I was supposed to be doing dishes. And I had just arrived. Yeah, but then I lived with Sister Petronilla at Berry, so and then I had her for French at Siena, so we became good friends. Yeah.
No one like her.
No.
Yeah. Lois was your baptismal name.
It was.
Yes. So did you complete your 4 years at Siena?
I did. I was finished at the end of my semester as a senior, and so decided to enter in February.
With a major in mathematics.
With a major in math, yeah. And a minor in French, yeah.
Well, that was your background, too.
It was. But at that time, they didn't emphasize speaking French. It was mostly translation. And so, and my mom and dad spoke to one another in French when they didn't want us to hear or understand what they were saying.
When you say us, how many us's were there?
How many us's were there? Well, actually, we were 14.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
I give you my heart and my soul. Well, the first prayer my mom taught me. Yes. Anyway, two are half-brothers. And my mother was 20 when she married my dad. And the boys at that time, they were both boys, were soon to be 10, one of them, and one of them 5. And my brother, the younger one, said at one point, the older one said to him, "We won't like her." So that's what she
was presented with.
We presented with. And then in the 4th grade, we had a hearing test. I was in the back of the room, and they asked me one of the questions was, how many brothers and sisters did you have, or maybe how many brothers? And I remember wondering whether I should count the 2 or say that they were half-brothers or whatever. And so the teacher thought I was deaf or had a hearing problem. So when I went home, I told Mother, and she said, I've treated those 2 boys exactly the way that I've treated everybody else in the family, so they're your brothers. So from that point on, I had no trouble saying that I had, that we were 14 and not having to say yes, but 2 of them were half.
2.
And oh my goodness, yes.
And was your father's name Paul James?
No, actually, he was Joseph. But we discovered during my mother's marriage to him that he was Paul Joseph. And I think he didn't even know that himself, but discovered his birth certificate, and he was Paul Joseph. So that was kind of neat then, yeah.
So the name Paul James
was the name of the second youngest he would have been.
Is he deceased?
Yes, he died as a baby. And I still remember we had the little white casket in our living room because at that time, that's where the wake was. And every one of my mother's lady friends who came in would cry. And so then my mother cried, and so then I cried. But he looks so dear, that little baby dressed in white, in the casket.
And that memory stays with you
yes,
with the name.
Has
no wonder you
stayed
didn't
with me,
change
yes.
at the
and
time.
So then when it was time to choose a name, my mother was Alma, and there were lots of Mary Josephs and even the Marie Joseph, because Mother's middle name was Marie. I was trying to put something together to honor them. And so I had two choices. I think one was Mary Jo Alma, and the other was Jo Alma Marie. And then I had to have a third one, so I thought, well, I'll put Paul James, because I certainly don't want to choose two of my brothers and sisters there. And everybody was delighted with that. They just really were.
Well, from Siena, who are some of the professors that were there at the time, some of our sisters?
All right. Well, Sister Marie Loretta was my math teacher for 3 years, followed by Sister Irma. Sister Miriam Michael was there, so she convinced me one time to take a geography course that was being offered. And I remember at the time, it was like late registration, and Sister Marie Loretta asked me whether she was going to advise me or whether Sister Miriam Michael was, you know, because it was kind of like an extra course. So that was the end of that. And Agneta was chemistry.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Was Sister Lorraine there at the time?
Sister Lorraine,
Yes.
for Spanish.
Yes.
Petronella for French. Mary Jerome for English, because mostly there was only one sister in each of those departments, and Joachim for history.
My.
Yes.
And Patrick Jerome, probably.
And Patrick Jerome for philosophy, and then a Dominican priest for, I had logic from Father O'Connell. Yes.
When you entered as a postulant, usually the MO was, you have some college education, we'll send you out to teach as a postulant. Did that happen to you?
That happened to me. I think was there for just a couple of weeks, and I was sent a visitation. Sister Helen Rita was the math teacher there and was ill, so I replaced her. And my recollection of that was, first of all, when I went into the classroom, it was a lab, and here half the students were facing one way and half the other. So that was the first thing I did, turn them around to face me when I was teaching.
And you were in this black outfit with a little black veil.
Yes, yes.
Who helped you? Who helped you enter?
Sister Maria Loretta. But she had left Siena by the time I entered, and so Sister Ellen Vincent was the one who brought me over.
Yes.
Came over early because the girls at Siena, because our semester ended after Christmas at that time, and they were going to follow that with a retreat. And so somebody said probably I should not make the retreat.
You're going to have a life of retreats.
Right, but come over early, which I did.
And who was your guardian angel?
Sister Anthonita Porta.
Oh, my.
Oh,
what
my,
an
is
angel.
right. What an angel is right.
She probably didn't know what to do with you.
Well, she kind of seemed to be awestruck by the fact that I was a college senior, you know, and I think she hadn't even graduated from high school at that point, one of the very youngest ones in our group, but so dear.
And you remained friends, I'm sure, through
Yes, we did, but kind of lost contact because I didn't come back to Adrian in the summer like
everybody else.
Everybody else did to finish. I didn't have to, no.
Did you take time for a master's degree, or did you go right on for?
I went right on
for your PhD.
And as I look at it, I really think they should have done something with me at that level, but I just followed directions.
And you received your
PhD
schooling at the University of Notre Dame, correct?
I did, yes.
And in 4 years.
Yes.
Do you know, is there anyone else in the community that has a doctorate in mathematics?
Like Katharina does.
Oh.
Yeah,
wonderful.
she does.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Were there any other sisters at that time studying with you?
With me. Sister Irma and I went together, and she was there to study chemistry, although she at that time had just a really good background in math.
Yeah.
But they needed another chemist, and so, of course, I think Sister Miriam Michael was probably responsible for that.
Wasn't that a time at Notre Dame where it wasn't co-ed yet,
It
was it?
wasn't co-ed.
So what did they do with the nuns? I mean,
Well, they did have housing on campus, but not much. Rooms above the laundry.
oh dear.
So we had to find a space off campus. And the first place we looked at was close to campus, but it turned out that they were of Jewish background, and we would live in the basement and not use any of the dishes, and lots of little rules that we had to have or obey. So we found another place farther from campus in St. Joe's Parish, I think it was, with a family, and we shared a bedroom. First of all, took the bus to campus, but then we discovered that their daughter, Joan, was working close to campus, so she started dropping us off. So we only had to come back on the bus.
But you ended your study
It
living
was just that 1 year
1
off
year,
campus,
yes.
right?
Otherwise, you were above the laundry.
And then we got rooms above the laundry,
Yes.
but it wasn't so bad, really.
So I presume as soon as you received your doctorate, you were stationed, ministered to, appointed to Berry College.
Well, no, I wasn't. My first assignment after I got that degree was Regina Dominican High School. Helped open that school. Very, very busy year, as I recall. And I remember having sore feet all year
Because
of the length of the halls. And we lived on 4th floor.
And your
so
black
we had
shoes.
lovely big bedrooms, yes. Even though we shared a bedroom with somebody, it was like being alone because the room was so big.
it was like a classroom, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Sister Kevin must have been there if it was the first year.
Yeah, Sister Kevin was president. And Kevin was president, yes, and Sister Richard Ellen the superior. And then I had Sister Rita Marie and Sister Edmund, who were my postulant mistress and my novice mistress.
Well, as they say, may the force be with you.
Right. And now I realize they were all pretty big names. Sister Giles was there, Sister Dennis Michael in science.
Was Sister Winifred there?
And Sister Winifred Lynch was there for English.
Yeah.
Sister Maria Villada for music, and Sister Ann Pauline, Sis Bay for art, yeah. So it was a nice group. It really was a nice group.
Were any of the students eventually Adrian Dominicans?
Oh yes, we started with 2 classes because they were supposed to have opened the year before, and they didn't. So we had a small group of sophomores and then a larger group of freshmen, one of whom was Pat Walter.
Oh my.
Yes.
Did you have her for class?
I had her for algebra, and
We'll have to test her now on her mathematics skills.
and she was an excellent student, no trouble there. But I used to give them problems sometimes, logic problems, to make it a little more interesting. And she took hers home and would come back with it solved and with a problem from her dad for me to solve. and
what fun.
Oh, right.
Yes.
I don't have the problem now, but it seems to me the problem he sent was something about a monkey and a banana and all kinds of things like that.
Yes.
So it was fun. Mm-hmm.
Tell me, please, because I know you spent many a year in Berry. Was that your next assignment?
It was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So it was a young college at the time, wasn't it? Relatively.
Well, it would have been 19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you first went there.
When I first went there. And when I went down, Sister Nadine also went for philosophy. Sister Adrian Kettler went to be in the library.
Oh my.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
And then, of course, Sister Petronilla was there, so I knew some of the sisters, so it was very nice. Yes, I've just had very, very good experiences. I was in Puerto Rico for 3 years, my first assignment. That Sister Edmund had taken me aside to say that I was going to Puerto Rico and I'd be going home, but I was not to tell anybody. But she thought I should alert my family. And I went with Sister Cyril Edwin and Sister Colette, flew down with them. We stopped in Buffalo, and I had never flown before. And I learned later that the plane couldn't take off.
Oh, no.
The plane couldn't.
You weren't supposed to go.
So, but was trying to, okay. And so I think that we eventually got on another plane. And so we missed our flight then to Puerto Rico, so we had to stay in a hotel overnight. And so we arrived in Puerto Rico on a different flight, kind of in the middle of the day. And I remember we parked out on the tarmac because there were no such things as, you know, waiting rooms.
Yeah.
And when I got to the door to go out, the heat was coming up from that black tarmac, you know. And I said to myself, I'll never survive.
But you did a couple years, didn't you?
I did for 3 years.
Yes.
And that was a really lovely experience for me, too.
Is there anyone in the congregation now that was a student?
Yeah, Sister Rosario Martin and her sister Carmen and 2 of her brothers,
Oh, my.
Umberto and Samuel, were in high school at the time, so I had them in class.
Well, you probably saw them at the time of Rosario's Jubilee then.
No, they weren't able. Her sisters came.
Her sisters, yes.
But I didn't have them in class. They were younger than she. Carmen came.
Carmen
Came, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was nice, yeah.
Yeah.
And I taught them tennis when I was there because it was kind of a new high school building, and here's this lovely tennis court, and nobody's using it. So I said, well, I can teach you how to play. So there I am in my
white habit.
long habit. I'd go home and be wet practically to my knees because I ran around.
The humidity.
And they bought me a pair of Keds, you know, and a tennis racket. And to this day, Carmen and Rosario love tennis.
Had you played tennis
Oh,
before?
I played tennis, yes.
At home?
At home, yeah.
Well, who would have thought?
So I
you'd
mean, when
be
I said
using
I
that
taught
gift?
them, you know, I knew how to keep score and that kind of thing. But they enjoyed it. And one time, Sister Mary Jean was the second superior there, and she knew Doris Hart, who was a women's tennis player, successful at that time, and she was playing in a tournament in San Juan. Mary Jean got tickets for several of us, and so we went over to that wonderful tennis tournament.
In your habits.
In our habits, right, yeah.
Tell me this. I know you knew Karin Fry of happy memory,
Yeah.
God rest her soul, who left us prematurely, I think.
Oh,
you know, given
definitely,
what was she
definitely.
in her 60s?
Well, no, she'd be 80 this year.
Okay.
So she would have been 77, I think, when
So
she died.
She was older
76.
when she entered.
Oh, right.
What's the story of her entering? Do you know?
Yes, she was a lay teacher at Barry, along with Sister Anita, Anita Butler, who was the niece of one of the sisters. And a third person, I think, was a girl from Adrian, Michigan, as a matter of fact. Anita was in nursing, and I think the girl's name was Annette Ayers, was in English. And they lived over at the villa.
Oh.
And Sister Karin liked what she saw, and at the end of that year decided to enter.
Were you her sponsor?
No, Agnes Louise was,
Agnes.
because she was in science.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Were you part of Karen's research with orchids?
Well, kind of, I always think of it as being the companion to the Summa. The first opportunity I had was to go into the Everglades with her, with a person who knew his way around. And it was in the spring, and so she had field clothes, and so we got them for me, and the only thing I had for my feet were the kind of overshoes that we used to wear that went up to your knees.
Like galoshes.
Galoshes. And so we didn't realize that it was going to be very, very, very wet. And so here I am trudging through water up to my knees, up to my waist with those boots. And we had a picture of me after the trip lifting my leg to let the water out so that I could get out of the boots. But we did see some lovely orchids, because the man who guided us knew where they were, so we went to this spot and then we went to another spot. But in walking, the water was dark because the bark, and the roots of the trees had made it dark, so you couldn't tell what you were walking through. And we had just barely gotten into the glades when we heard a gunshot, and the man who accompanied the guide had shot a water moccasin in the water. And so from that point on, Sister John Karin, I learned later, was saying the act of contrition. And I said I was praying that we'd find some orchids if we're going to go through all this.
Well, that wasn't the last trip.
No.
You took 1,000.
Well, yes, and then she began to study at the University of Miami for her PhD. And her director is kind of world-renowned in orchids. In fact, he was in charge of a big orchid house in Tampa eventually. But he wanted her to study abroad. Mm-hmm. And so he thought, when he had a contact in Mexico, Oaxaca, Mexico, which is way down. And so I happened to be somewhat free that semester. And so I accompanied her. Our trip was 3,000 miles there. We drove 3,000 miles while we were there into the mountains and here and there and everywhere, and then 3,000 miles back. And of course, at that time, we had heard of things like, be careful. If they take things off the car and strip it down and...
That never happened.
No, however, we did have trouble.
Car trouble.
We did.
But you didn't when you went to Nigeria, I bet.
No. So that was another contact that her thesis advisor had, so we went there. But that time, we stayed with a group of sisters because we were supposed to stay at the college at which the professor taught. But he hadn't made arrangements. But I think in the end, we were much better off where we were with the sisters. And we went on field trips then from there. Mm-hmm.
Going back to your years at Berry, when you first went to Berry, it was called a college. So
yes.
you have seen the growth of Berry
very,
into the university that it is today.
Very much so.
Who was the first president that you worked with?
Well, actually, Mother Gerald would have been the first one, and then Mother Genevieve. But shortly after that, Sister Trinita was appointed the president. But after that, I think they did a search. And then Sister Gina Laughlin followed her, and Sister Linda Bevilacqua followed her. So I think that's all of it.
Was it difficult to say goodbye to the Miami area, to the Berry community, when you decided to come to Adrian?
Oh, no.
No?
No, because my good friend had died.
Yes, yeah.
And the number of sisters working at Berry had diminished quite a bit. And so we had been living at the villa, which had been a dormitory for girls. When we went there, the sophomores lived there, and then pretty soon, when the men were we decided to enroll men. They lived at the villa, and then and maybe at that time, a few sisters lived there, but finally, the sisters, at one point, almost every room was occupied by sisters. And then as they began to leave, the men came back, the girls came back.
It
Yeah.
was a deja vu.
It was.
Yeah. But the building doesn't exist today,
No,
does it?
after I, in fact, before I left, one of the sisters said to me, I don't want you to leave. I'm sure that once you leave, they're going to say that we all should leave. And it didn't take long, really, for that decision to be made.
What lovely memory do you want to keep in your heart about Barry? 54 years is quite amazing.
Oh, well, besides the sisters that I lived with, who were all great, the students, especially in my first years, you really got to know them well. And I still am in touch with some of them. And so I would say, those two things, certainly the sisters and the students, yeah.
And I would imagine you had a passion for teaching.
Oh, I do. And so when we were able to decide to do other things, I didn't want to do other things, because when I went to Siena, I wanted to be a teacher. And then I loved teaching in Puerto Rico because, again, the students were so lovely there.
Like sponges.
Yes, yes. And so then, of course, after I got my degree, I went to Regina. I liked that. And then went down to Barry and stayed. And actually, in the last years there, I wasn't in the classroom. I was helping identify students who needed help and identify students who were in the wrong class, somehow they slip through when you advise them. They don't do what you say, they shred and they think. But.
Well, let's gather up all those lucky students you've had through the year, and I'm sure they would join me in thanking you for your passion and for your openness and for your integrity and for your love of what you did and the love you gave them. And thank you so much, Paul James, for your time with us today.
Oh, you're welcome.